not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. This is Friday Java on the 1st of June, our first program for the month of June from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. What we're going to do here, some, editorial changes here. We'll have the people from the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, and of course we always remember Heather Heyer, who was killed there by white supremacists, alt-rights, and various other bandit gangs that had banded together. The people at the University of Virginia are talking about the odds the Democrats have in the congressional races. We have a program about that, and we'll be talking a little bit about methodology and strategy. So what we'll do is we'll put it up front. There are various theories of how to organize political parties. There's the maximum by the late Speaker of the House, Thomas Tip O'Neill, all politics are local, which in some instances works perfectly. An example would be the poisoning of the water supply in Flint, Michigan. That is a local issue, has local currency, and has currency for the state of Michigan. Not heard much about it lately because Gateway Snyder and his administration is leaving. He will be gone next January, and they have a new race going on in the state of Michigan. But what has happened over the nation in the last few years, last 10, 15 years, but we have nationalized issues. And political campaigns have been nationalized. An example would be Medicaid, Medicare. The state of Virginia just expanded their Medicaid program, and those are programs that affect ordinary people. And a political party has to
how issues affect ordinary people. And Bernie Sanders had been traveling around the nation continuously talking about those issues, such as the fight for 15, basic economic inequality, the tax cut ripoff, those kinds of national issues. And at the time that there was emphasis on that particular type of campaign, the Democrats were ahead in the generic ballot. What has happened in some races, not all, but the Democratic Congressional Committee and various other Democratic organizations have tried to move their candidates to the right. And that has been tried before, and it has not worked. The races this year that stood out and were won by the Democrats were candidates that ran. Now, some of these candidates may have had military service, but they ran on such things as the expansion of Medicaid, Medicare for all, progressive issues. And that is the key to running a campaign. If one lesson is to be learned of what happened to us in Ohio, in the governor's race, there was Dennis Kucinich, a progressive candidate, and there were several others, and the vote was split up. They ended up with a guy named Cadre, who used to be at the Consumer Protection Agency. Cadre is one of these dull candidates. In this day and age, you don't run a dull candidate. You just simply do not do that. And we'll get to an interesting article from Vanity Fair, of all places, that they point out some of this problem is the Democratic national leadership being of a different era. That is not the only problem. The problem is, if you look at DJ Trump is in his 70s. He's of a different era. But one thing DJ Trump understands and his Republican gang, that they have to nationalize issues, and by using a Twitter, they can simply do that. They can start at 3 a.m. in the morning and finish up at 8 p.m. at night. And thus they seize the high ground. And once you seize the high ground, you have the news cycle. You, of course, have to have a news media that cooperates with you. And that has happened. If you look at the latest DJ Trump operation, pardoning people. He pardoned this conservative writer, filmmaker, and all. Most people don't know who the bastard is. But he pardoned him, someone that gave a $20,000 illegal contribution. A Peanuts or Mickey Mouse affair. Then he talks about pardoning Martha Stewart. Well, Martha Stewart has been off of TV for so long, she has been forgotten along with reruns of Happy Days. But yet that got sensation in the news. And then he had to kind of, as they say, patent it out with Rod Blagojevich. Blagojevich was the governor of Illinois. He was a progressive governor, a grassroots working class person out of the north side of Chicago, and was railroaded out. He was not favored by the Democratic establishment there in Cook County. He ran against them, and thus when he went off to the big lockup, the Max, out in Colorado, it was good that he had left. But the Democratic Party, at least statewide in Illinois, lost the governor's seat because they simply did not have a candidate that could win. It was basically that simple. And in many of these states, the Democratic Party has ran candidates that have been around since, as LBJ would say, since Christ was a corporal. Doesn't work out very well for the Democratic Party. And this is a major, major problem. And at this juncture, progressives don't really have time to argue strategy. I'm noticing even with some left-wing organizations, we're talking about local issues using party clubs. Well, that'll work for a traffic sign, the famous Newark traffic sign. But it doesn't work for the politics of DJ Trump. DJ Trump and his handlers are slick enough to nationalize their campaigns. What are they running on? Tax cuts. Well, they've already done a tax cut. Then they floated the trial balloon of a second tax cut. Never heard much about that one. Then there was infrastructure. Hadn't heard much about that lately either. But the idea of building the wall, now that plays to the base. That is an issue that resonates more in areas that have borders than areas that do not have borders. But we were looking at a new study, and this would involve the quote-unquote social net, the resentment of European voters towards the social net. Very troubling situation, but that has been going on for a very, very long time. That voters in certain areas, particularly in working class areas, have been mobilized to dislike quote-unquote government giveaways. What they don't comprehend, most of the so-called government giveaways are given away to corporations and to the lobbyists that represent these corporations. People, ordinary people, get very little of this. Even if you look at the Medicare, Medicaid program, Big Pharma and those people benefit more than the people. Yes, some people are sustained. Some people get drugs that keep their lives going. But in general, those are just only maintaining their lives. They're not going to the root cause, such as, say, diabetes. I have diabetes, I understand that. But you have to deal not only with medications, but you have to deal with the root cause of diabetes, which is weight loss, proper nutrition, etc. And that has to be emphasized. The same thing with hypertension, etc. Nonetheless, let's go to this markup here, and let me just. We'll go to Vanity Fair, I suppose, first. And what we're going to do, we'll split some of this up between a Friday Jobber and the week that was. Nonetheless, this, they call it the Trump Show. This is by Peter Handy, I believe is his hand by. Make certain that I get his name correct here. Oh, hand by, okay. Had him right to begin with. He writes nonetheless for Vanity Fair. This is also up on Facebook. We put it up there. We introduced the subject, but the same day this week, DJ Trump was tweeting about the FBI, and he used the word Spygate. Now, that was not DJ Trump. That was a spin doctor in his campaign. Is how you run propaganda, and then the witch hunt. You see the keywords popping out here that were splashed across the country's TV screens, and in short order. Senate Democrats held a photo op at the most expensive Exxon station on Capitol Hill, Exxon Mobil. The leader joined by three other suit-wearing Democrats to make case that Trump's decision to pull out of the Iranian nuclear deal would drive up the cost of gasoline. It was a differential middle-class pocketbook argument, one the Democrats hoped to make in 2018. Senate Democrats demand lower gas prices. Well, that is an issue, but you don't necessarily need to be out there in suits. You be out there in polos or whatever. Senate Democrats were looking for traction on gas prices. Here's the problem, and we'll talk about this more on Numbers Man. Gas prices are affected by, or I should say, as a commodity. And commodity markets can be manipulated. The major producers, OPEC, the Russian Federation, etc., can decide, well, we're going to limit the amount of petrol that we put out, in other words, barrels per day. That will eventually bring down the cost of gasoline. I noticed it dropped a penny or two. And other market conditions. So it's a very, very tricky kind of situation, in that you can manipulate the market to at least give some temporary relief. It's sort of like what happens with the stock market when you push certain stocks in the S&P 500. You can talk them up or you can talk them down. And this is where you get into a very, very tricky situation. We're not really into the summer driving season. We've had Memorial Day, which is the kickoff of a summer. So this in itself tends to be a very, very tricky. The Democrats probably should have went to Omaha, Nebraska or something to do that, not on Capitol Hill. This is always true for the party out of power. Well, the Republicans did a very good job when they were out of party, but they had Barack Obama, and they could use this racist wedge, which kept Barack Obama's numbers for much of, the second term below 50%. And in fact, in his first term, but he was still able to win re-election based upon issues. Now, let me go on with this fellow's article here. Only Trump, an old school media hound who still cares about things like magazine covers, ever faced 90 era TV personalities, has figured it out. He dominates our attention universe to point to where he blocks out the sun. Well, DJ Trump is a very big man to begin with. Excuse me. And he's loud enough, and he has issues out there that affect his base. We go on here. He inhabits a world of niche interests and platforms and distractions where everybody is supposedly paying attention to their own thing. Unlike mass audience days of I Love Lucy, for those who remember I Love Lucy, it had been on a long time, that commanded 71% of TV eyeballs in 1953. Today, you can happily solo yourself from signals that you don't care about. Our attention spans are shrinking. Access reported this week that more than 70% of the American population regularly use another digital device while watching a TV, or they don't have a TV. And no doubt that is the smartphone. And you get information on smartphone, generally speaking, in Twitter types. In other words, people are reading the headlines. The tabloid newspapers figured this out in New York, in Chicago, in Boston. We had the Herald America, and those guys. In other words, they have a blaring headline, sort of like the National Enquirer, and people read the headline and very little of the story, and that was how they got the information. Well, that sort of thing is well set up for social media. On Earth, too, when Hillary Monster Clinton won, we might just be watching the NBA playoffs on the Americas while browsing recipes on our second screen. But we live on a planet where Trump comes at us from every angle. In Trump's world, you see something about Trump on TV while you push an alert about Trump surfacing on your mobile phone, prompting you to text your friends about Trump. And that's the whole idea right there. As a professor from Columbia Law School, Tim Wu, writes in his book, The Attention Merchants, Trump cannot be avoided or ignored. His ideas are never hard to understand. He offers simple slogans, repeats 1,000-fold, no doubt about that. He's talked about witch hunts, spy masters, etc. He claims that he is a victim of a deep state of conspiracy designed to undermine his presidency, Spygate. And this is one of the big problems you have with this whole Russian situation. The conservative echo chamber falls in line behind DJ Trump because they have nowhere else to go. We did a program on the signal and the noise, and how the noise is louder than the signal. I believe we did two, and I think we did the last one. I have to look. But nonetheless, he brought old Rudy Giovanni in One side claimed that Robert Mueller is planning to wrap up his investigation where Trump obstructed the Russian investigation. Giuliani. Anyway, old Giuliani used to be the mayor of New York. So Giuliani followed a tried and true scheme here. The Democrat consulting class in Washington would like you to know, thank you very much, that its candidates run for office this year aren't focused on the Trump scandal or the Russian investigation or Stormy Daniels. Well, you only get so much out of Stormy Daniels. That the national media is fixated on that stuff and regular people don't care. Trump, 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 Russia, Russia, Russia. But no, Democratic professionals are fond of tweeting. Americans are more preoccupied with day-to-day concerns like healthcare, gas prices, no doubt about that. Affordable education. Those are things that people are very much concerned about, but they can be easily distracted. You have to understand, in low turnout elections, you only need to distract about 27% of the people, because you're having 50% turnouts many times below 50% turnouts. Trump's personality and conduct in office lags well behind in last year's elections in Virginia and New Jersey. Well, those are special elections. Democrats have been winning by talking about local issues like transportation and education. But the undercurrent to all the Democratic energy is no doubt Trump. And Trump continues on. They bring in Tom Piccirillo. He's is a former Virginia Congress and progressive activist. You don't need a poll to tell you this, and it's because Trump, his politics, his recklessness, his personality. But that's deliberate. Yes, his scandals, anti-Trump sentiment is going to drive the midterm for Democrats, in part because Trump has his own news cycle, and in part because of the opposition party. That's just how it works. Still, that Trump owns the news cycle, and that is a big, big problem, because you want to own the news cycle, not a DJ Trump. The Russian investigation isn't going anywhere, and that's true. People have just about given up on it. A poll out this week, the Navigator Research is a Democratic firm, found that Americans are having a tough time seeing through the fog. And we have that, and we'll talk about it tomorrow night. A full 59% of Americans say they aren't aware of the investigation uncovering any crimes. Well, they were uncovered earlier there, and that's one of the problems. Where's the meat? One could argue perhaps that the media has done a poor job in explaining the ins and outs, but no one would accuse the media of not covering every turn of the Russian saga. And, of course, Mueller operates in silence. It's up to Trump and the Democrats to shape the almighty narrative. So Trump just calls it a witch hunt, in which any competent defense attorney would come with the word witch hunt. That's just the way it's put out there. As the Associated Press, the AP, reported last week, Trump told in a session that he wanted to brand the FBI informant who was dispatched to snoop on his campaign a spy. Well, a spy is an old term, dirty word, so some spin doctor there called it Spygate 10 times in 3 days. Well, Spygate is a very catchy slogan for Mr. Hopler. This is still a mistake that Democrats make. The party still is led largely by people who came of age last century rather than this one. That, as Piccirillo said, the old idea was everyone knows their own district best, and that you can go home and have your own message. Not true. DJ Trump's on the TV, you standing outside the door trying to talk to someone that's on their mobile phone. That makes sense. That made sense a generation ago when people got the majority of their news from local sources. But news nowadays, and it has been, if you remember the eyewitness news formats and various other formats, nationalized. You could be watching local news, but if you're watching Detroit or you're watching it in Annapolis, Maryland, You have following the same basic cookie cutter pattern. But now, if you watch Sinclair, you watch the same damn broadcast. The vast majority of information comes from national sources, and social media, and a lot of confusing things out there in social media. Piccarella told me that the Democrats should absolutely focus on health care premiums and the fact that the tax bill overwhelmingly benefits the wealthy. And that is something that has been known. People got a minimum relief that came out, basically kicked in February. In March and April, they got what they're going to get, and that's the end of it right there. And many, many small and medium-sized businesses, and we've been talking about this on Numbers, man. I invite you to tune into it, another part of our WBRN Boston Red Network family. But we've been talking about that, and the small businesses, medium businesses, have not figured it out. Are they better off under the new tax regime, or the older tax regime? In many instances, they were better off under the old tax regime. Where will the tariffs affect them? Now we put the tariffs 20 and 10% on the EU, Canada, and Mexico, and Canada is crying about it because Canada has a weaker economy. Not much from Mexico and the EU will deal with that. So the Democrats haven't put it out there and talked about it in an effective way. When Trump says witch hunt, a deep state, and for the Democrats you're sort of getting nothing. And part of this is they don't understand how to defend this character, and this stuff has been out there for a very, very long time. That the Republicans have talked about deep state, the conspiracy of theories. They had a problem with Barack Obama's birth certificate. They finally brought out the quote-unquote what they call long form, and DJ Trump was short on form. Then he went to transcripts. So that didn't resonate with people as well. But he carried the scheme on for 5 years. Democrat ad makers will argue, let's see. Excuse me. They rightfully don't want to talk about the prospects of impeachment, a concept that makes Americans queasy, no doubt about that. They'll leave that to Representative Waters of Los Angeles. In the wake of Hillary Clinton's loss, it's important to stick to issues on the campaign trail instead of just talking about scandals and personalities. Well, you can't win a campaign when you're running against a mega personality like DJ Trump. If you get into personalities, that's one of the problems the Democrats have had in California, where you have in some of these congressional districts, and you had the same thing in Ohio. A number of Democrats running. You don't need ego. But one of the things you always have to remember, the Democratic Party itself is not a quote-unquote disciplined party. The Democratic Congressional Committee would like to make it that way, but that's just not the way things interact. So if it doesn't work that way, there are problems, and there will continually be problems. Let me finish up his little deal here. The Washington conversation has all been insular and small, far removed from the concerns of everyday Americans, as Clinton's memorably called them. But there is an ever-shrinking distance between local and national. A voter in a state home district in Iowa is reading and watching the same news as a similar voter in Arizona. There's no doubt about that. And we do this all the time. We go to local newspapers for local coverage, and in every one of those newspapers, I would get an AP story, a Washington Post story, or other stories that are national informed. Not only that, written nationally. Sometimes there is a local journalist that will give the take, but many newspapers now can't afford a Washington correspondent. And if they do, it's not. They're not using one as much as they used to be. Used to be every major newspaper, whether it be the Post Intelligencer in Seattle, the Pittsburgh paper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or whatever, the Globe in Boston, had a national correspondent in Washington. Even the Daily World and Daily Worker always had a national correspondent at the press club. Not as important anymore. So this was just how people got their news. Democrats that should be talking about it more if they don't want to be caught by surprise on election day. There's no doubt about this. And it's very good doing it. Put the other way, the biggest show in the world is Trump. And then the primetime program about Grandpa Chuck's visit to the Exxon mobile station debuted on another network. Well, part of the problem they have is, and Chuck Schumer is an excellent leader as far as tactics. He saved Obamacare, no doubt about that, in the Senate. But at the same time, he doesn't have the personality to go out there and have the flair of a DJ Trump. They need to put someone out there, and Bernie Sanders was serving the purpose. Of course, Bernie is in his 70s, and the Democrats tried to temper down Bernie Sanders as much as they could, and his protege, Nina Turner. They attacked Nina Turner, but Nina Turner and Bernie were doing the good work. Let's go to the people at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, and we have to find them. Oops. Incidentally, the governor in Missouri is no more. He's supposed to resign today. Eric Gittens, one of those family value fellas that got caught up in something you don't want to get caught up in. Things that were not family values, and he had to leave. A post-Memorial Day status report. This is from Kyle Klondike, the managing editor at the Crystal Ball. And he has the key points up there. Both Republicans and Democrats have the same equal odds of winning a House majority. That's usually not good for the Democrats. Republicans remain clearly the favorite in the battle for Senate control. Democrats stand in with at least a few more net governorships than they have now. This is in 2019. So this is checking on that in the bygone political year. The symbolic end of summer. Labor Day denotes the beginning of the campaign season, but that begins at 3 o'clock from DJ Trump's bedroom. We have lots about, we've written lots about the House, so the interest is a more in-depth assessment to check out. We held roughly 50-50 odds. Well, that's a safe position to give. 50-50 odds can be 60-40 or what have you. The president's parties usually lose big majorities, but this is a different type, and this is one of the criticisms we've had of this quote-unquote normalcy, particularly when they go back to bygone eras when the nation was in an apartheid era. That would have been in the 50s and in the 60s. It has come out of that, and now you have a different regiment. You have different types of voters, particularly younger African Americans, millennials, etc. And women have been doing a yeoman's job in getting rid of a lot of these right-wing Republicans out there. The Democrats do benefit on a balance from the unusual range of open seats. At least 69 of those seats. There's no doubt about that. The Democrats lead in the House generic ballot, but that is in the, we'll get to that, that's just in margin of error. Don't put very much into that. Not at this point in time. Splitting the losses up and evenly would produce a 224-211 Republican majority, or a net gain of 17 for the Democrats from the 194 seats that they won in 2016. But if the election breaks towards the Democrats, as midterms often do, well, it'd be a good day out there. But if you look at these states where Republicans in Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, Nebraska, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi, those are states that the Republicans have, and very difficult to reduce to get the bastards out of there. In Nevada and Arizona, toss-ups. North Dakota, that is a Democratic seat is a toss-up. Missouri, I want Claire McCaskill down in Missouri. Sheriff Donnelly over in Indiana, that's always been tenuous. In West Virginia, Senator Meacham has been looking in some polls better. And in Florida, we have Mr. Nelson down there. They call that a toss-up. I've seen some polling that favors Nelson a little bit. That may be a run out, but that's 7 seats right there, with tenuous positions in North Dakota. Missouri, maybe the Gittins thing will help Claire McCaskill, possible there. In Indiana, not sure what will help Sheriff Donnelly. West Virginia, don't worry as much about West Virginia, but any of those, Florida, no. So those are 17 states there. And then we get into some other states that could be tenuous also. Gubernatorial races, now this is, Republicans have, 26 of those current control, and Democrats have 9, and there's 1 independent out in Alaska. Now, this is how the crystal ball sees it. Toss-ups in Nevada, in Alaska, Minnesota, and Michigan. That's not very good news. In Florida, chemical, healthcare. Scott is out, but there's a hot race in Florida beyond turnout in Florida. Michigan, Gateway Snyder has, as they say, went into the sunset, sort of like his Gateway computer. He's no longer there. In Minnesota, Tim Hu-Pawlenty is running for governor again, talking about the bad old days. And how will that factor out? The Democrats have a number of candidates out there who will be going through a primary. And that in itself can be a situation. If you remember, Al Franken, who was shoo-in for re-election, was replaced by someone named Tina Smith. Smith had run actually for lieutenant governor statewide, so her name is out there, and so is this Tim Hu-Pawlenty. But now, can he get enough Trump voters out in the rural districts to combat, the urban voters? And the Democratic strategy seems to be, particularly with Waltz, who's running for governor, he's running out of southern Minnesota, is to take care of as much of southern Minnesota, his congressional district, as he can, and he'll go north to northern Minnesota and grab as many votes as they can there and come back into the Twin Cities, where the majority of Democratic voters are. So that is their strategy. Tim Pawlenty will pretty much have to stay in the rural areas if he is a nominee. Now, there is another fellow named Johnson, who is also a right-winger, running out of the Twin Cities. So that'll be interesting to see how that race shapes up. In Colorado, don't really have the specifics on that. Nevada is a true toss-up, no doubt about that one. And we'll have some more information on these because of the level of exposure for Republicans in the governorships. It wouldn't be shocking Democrats netted at least some governorships. There's no doubt about that. Open seats, Democrats are defending in Colorado, Connecticut, and Minnesota, while Republicans are defending in Florida, Michigan, and Nevada. Nevada is much more hopeful. Michigan, with a strong candidate there, they can rally out, and a lot of that's going to depend on a couple of things. What happens with the economy? The economy, we'll talk about this on Numbers, man. The economy sends out mixed signals. Consumer confidence, according to one or two, we'll call them polls, but the confidence board is up, but at the same time consumer spending is down, and a lot of that around petrol. But we not only get that, we get these tariffs, so we got a lot of things all going at once. And the Democrats have to prepare for June 12th. That'll be the summit in Singapore between DJ Trump, Field Marshal That particular action will go off. We bet the house on that one, and it'll be all Trump. for that summit. But the summit will, as they say, go away. There's no big tax program out there to do. Trump is going to come with some announcement on a big pharma and a reduction in prescription drug prices. But how much of a reduction? He hadn't talked about reduction in insurance premiums. The Republicans used to push that on the Obamacare where premiums go. Yes, premiums do go up because Obamacare did not control premiums. The insurance companies did, and they have all raised their premiums. And this is a big issue to come forward on. And when we look at employment or unemployment, we're still having a lot of retail operations. Sears is closing more and more of their big box stores. So the retail sector has got some problems. They've lost thousands of workers. It's not being reported. The Democrats should be at a Sears store in Poughkeepsie. I don't think there is one in Poughkeepsie, but in Illinois or in wherever the Sears store is closing, California, Mississippi. Those are the kinds of things that you don't want to do all this suited stuff. You want to be out there looking like the people. And this is where you have all kinds of problems. Incidentally, in this map, New Mexico, and let's see how they're doing this. In Illinois, we didn't mention Illinois, Pennsylvania being in a better place. Now, in Tennessee, that's going to be an interesting situation down there. In Georgia, with Stacey Abrams, I noticed they were highlighting her, they're pulling the same scheme they pulled out in Montana, that she had some debt problems, and she's in a settlement with the IRS. That's not unusual. A lot of people are in installment plans, I should say, with the IRS, and other credit card difficulties. But the way she explained it was, they're going to hammer her day and night, 24/7. If she couldn't handle her personal finances, how she would handle the finances of the state of Georgia, which doesn't have as much effect on the governor as it has on the legislature, which the Republicans still control in Georgia. But she's going to have to work around that as best she can. One of the big problems you always have is when people run for office, many times they have not anticipated the environment. So in other words, if you had debt difficulties, as our friend out in Montana did, he was not contemplating running for representative, but he carried those into the race. And what had happened with him was a little bit different. He'd actually become disabled, and he worked as a musician, so sometimes he was able to make some dates, sometimes he was not. And what they tried to do was that he was unreliable because of his credit history. That is one of the house schemes businesses have always run on workers. Workers has a bad credit history, then they don't hire the worker. And the reason the worker had a bad credit history, generally speaking, is that the worker lost a better paying job or a job and was rebounding or rebranding from that, which his situation there, but he ran against a multi-millionaire, was impulsive and attacked the press. So when you look at these things overall, that's how you have to evaluate them. But when you have a 5-month window, as Abrams has now, although her name is known, and at the same time, the opponent, she doesn't know who the opponent will be. And tomorrow night on the Week That Was, we'll talk about the California primary, which is we'll do a special program on that, I believe on June 5th. California used to be very, very important primary, whether it be now or whether it be in the upper part. So those are some things we'll be looking at as we move forward. We'll take a little break here and we'll do the sports. Well, we have the NBA Finals here. The Cavaliers of Cleveland were defeated by the Warriors in Oakland, 124-114, a 10-point game. They lead at 1-0. this series has a long ways to go. Mr. James is there, and don't have the numbers on Mr. James. We'll look at this. LeBron James. This is from ESPN Game 1. One of the most dramatic 60-second periods in NBA history. In their own words, LeBron James pulls the Cavs ahead after leading 11 early in the game. The Cavaliers find themselves trailing for most of the second half. I didn't watch the game. James got the ball in the backcourt, and after Kevin Love's back, that's good. Junior Smith screen to Mr. Stephen Curry. We don't want to forget him. There's a timeout. His free throw. Cleveland had a 104-102 lead. And Kevin Durant, we don't want to forget Mr. Durant, is getting a lot of screens there. James and Durant changed and charged to LeBron James there. So Curry gave the ball to Durant using with 14 seconds left on the shot clock. And various other people, the officials went to the monitor to review the call, and James was clearly outside of the restricted area. James, I thought I read that play just as well as I read any play in my career. I've seen the drive, etc. And clarity on the break and the change review. The trigger is that in the last 2 minutes of the fourth overtime, officials doubt whether the defender was in the restricted area while reviewing it. They make anyway. That was the game. Then we'll go to the National Hockey League here. What were they doing? Well, that will come later tonight. We'll have the Golden Knights will be in Washington with the Capitals. And let's see, the series tied 1-1. That's all we need to know. To Major League Baseball. The Angels were in the Motor City. Tigers 6-2. The Rays were in Oakland. 7-3. The Cubbies were in New York. They're on the road, and they'll be on the road, I think, the next 10 games. Cubbies 5-1. Mr. Cortana was the winner. Mr. Morrow got the save. Anyway, the Pirates and Cardinals in St. Louis. The Cardinals finally win 10-8 in St. Louis. The Nationals in Atlanta 4-2. The Phillies and Dodgers, the game I tuned. It was a very well fought game. Mr. Kershaw made his reemerged from the disabled list, basically speaking. In other words, he went 6 innings, and it was a good game. I think it was tied 1-1, and the Phillies finally got it. So it was a 2-1 Phillies over the Dodgers in Los Angeles. The Dodgers on their way to Denver, Cleveland, and the Twins. Cleveland 9-1 in the Twin Cities. The Red Sox and Astros in Houston. Always a tough place to be. Astros 4-2. The Marlins and Padres in San Diego. Padres 8-3. It was all Padres over the Marlins. The Rangers and Mariners out in Seattle. 6-1 Mariners over the Rangers. And rain got the Yankees and Orioles in Camden Yards. So that is baseball. The NBA series just getting on the way, and so is the National Hockey League. This will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone, and stay cool depending on where you are. The temps have moderated in some places. We'll see you on the week that was on a Saturday morning, and we'll take care of the other part of this. Some very good polling out there, and we'll get into the polling also. And we'll have the Monday morning quarterback on the Boston Red part of WBRN on Monday morning. And also the numbers man, that's our economics reports, macro. But anyway, we'll be talking about this economy. Have a lot of numbers out to talk about. The beige books are out. GDP is out. Some consumer measurements out. We got it all. And we'll also have another open source report.